Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pantokrator's webinar on bio-based and CO₂-based chemistry. We've got a great lineup for you today with some excellent guests, real leaders in the field. So before I introduce them, I'd like to share with you and with my colleague Victor some thoughts we have on the sector. And once we do that, we can kick into introducing the team. So if we look at the sector in this broad base, it's specialty chemicals is huge. It's about $1 trillion, which is 20% of the overall market for chemicals. But already by about 2030, 2032, we expect that be about a fifth of that, or 200 billion, would be bio-based alternatives. The interesting factor that we've got in this sector is that we have a double challenge. One is, how do we decarbonize the energy that we use in these processes? But also, it is a carbon-based product. So it's not so much how do we decarbonize biochemicals, but how do we defossilize them? And Victor will go into that in a second. But plastic and other biochemicals, they're incredibly useful products. We're not going to get rid of them. And just as a little data point, we've got 1 million plastic bottles are being produced every minute. So we're not going to. It's a useful product. We just need to be careful how we produce it and how we take care of it after its useful life. So Victor.
Thank you, Andre. And as most of you know, and as we've talked about extensively during our thermal energy storage webinars, most of the industrial heat today is produced using fossil fuels. But even if you were to electrify all of that heat for the chemical sector, you'd only be addressing half of the problem because, as Andre mentioned, more than 50% of the carbon is actually coming from the feedstocks. And we mentioned plastic earlier, and we're probably never going to be able to take carbon out of plastics, but we can try to change the provenance of this carbon from below the ground to above the ground. And how do you do that? You use bio-based or CO₂-based alternatives. Now talking about the bio-based chemicals market, it's going to more than double in the next 7 years. And this is actually going to be a multi-front expansion that's going to be driven by sectors like surfactants, lubricants, or alcohols.
As Victor mentioned, we already have quite a few products that are in the market. I mean, most famous, of course, is bioethanol. That's actually a commodity. But already bioplastics, biolubricants, biosurfactants are emerging as alternatives that are actually gaining scale. Now, we all know that performance and cost are absolute prerequisites for any success. And the cost argument is actually being addressed, interestingly, by higher performance. So because with some bioplastics you have, or biochemicals, you actually have higher performance, you actually need less of it. So you can, even at lower levels of production, you can achieve cost targets for large producers. So I think that gives us a kind of a head start, if you will. Looking further into kind of who are the players in this, it's actually an interestingly larger field. Now, we've just got a select group here, and interestingly, we've got two of the companies actually on our panel today, Holoferm and UBQ, which we'll hear from shortly. The other companies, we've divided them into biosurfactants and lubricants and plastics and solvents, but you've got large players and also emerging players. So the ones that are asterisked are ones that we consider are emerging. Victor?
Thank you, Andre. When we look a bit deeper at the CO₂-based chemicals market, I mean, we all know there are a lot of companies that capture CO₂. And these companies use different methods and technologies, but also different sources. And this is important because these two factors directly impact the purity of the CO₂ that you can capture. Higher purity CO₂ means lower cost. And this is important because, as you can see on the right-hand side, you're going to then use the CO₂ to make various materials, or to, as we like to say, to enhance them. Because, for example, in the case of polymers, by introducing CO₂ into the chemical composition of these materials, you can actually give them enhanced properties compared to maybe their petrol-based alternatives. Similar to the bio-based market, there are a few niches that are emerging in CO₂-based chemistry, and we name here some of them. most of them already have established players that are gaining ground. And one of them is actually Econic when we speak about polymers. And we're going to have the CEO, Keith Wiggins, speak to us on the panel afterwards. As a closing point, even though the CO₂-based chemicals market is smaller today than the bio-based one, we still believe there are some very interesting pockets, some of them highlighted here, that could be very, very exciting for investors in the near future.
Great. Thank you, Victor. Now, like all emerging technologies, it's not a straight road to success. I mean, there's bumps along the way, which we're all familiar with. And in examining biochemistry, you know, there's quite a good, robust amount of interest at the earlier stages, but there is definitely a valley of death in between that area of trying to get, you know, production scale and also having a commercial product. And that's actually quite long from our discussions is between, you know, TRL 5 and 7. But actually we're detecting that there's, from both sides, there are ways to reduce the CapEx. There's shared services, there's also tolled fermentation. So there's a number of steps that they're enabling companies to sort of reduce their CapEx as they grow. But also from the point of view of an end product and end formulation, AI is actually helping accelerate that back end of the R&D. So if we kind of look at it a little more deeply, we'll see that AI is actually starting to be used in a number of sectors in which you can reduce the amount of time spent on R&D, you know, and a factor of, you know, reducing it from a couple of years, you know, 3 years down to 2 or 1. Is actually a very, very significant thing for young companies who are watching their burn rates. So we do think that the contribution of AI was going to be increasingly felt. Right now, it's really at optimizing, not so much blue sky. But I think at some point in the future, maybe we can have time today to discuss where it could go. But we do think it has huge potential.
Thank you, Andre. And I mean, obviously, we're quite subjective because we really like these two sectors, but it seems like in the past few years, investors have sort of echoed our beliefs, because both 2024 and 2025 have been really positive years with a lot of transactions and quite sizable in nature. What's also interesting to note is that the investor universe is broadening. You obviously have your specialized financials, but we're seeing more and more corporates and CVCs delving deeper into the sector. And as a closing point, although 2025 has been quite a challenging year for fundraising for all sectors, we're still seeing deals happening. And we think this serves as a testament to investor confidence in the space moving forward. Now, how would you look at all of these sub-verticals from an investor perspective? Well, we tried to make kind of an illustrative example, and we're happy to discuss with any of you our assumptions on a call going forward. But just to give you a quick run through, on the y-axis, we've charted the decarbonization potential, whereas on the x-axis, we've illustrated the cost competitiveness. And the size of the bubbles just represents the growth potential from an investor perspective. We've also color-coded the different verticals using blue for CO₂-based alternatives and green for bio-based.
Great. Thank you, Victor. So to sort of sum it up and start our discussion, it's really, we see performance and cost are absolutely a key. Proof of broad market demand is going to be critical for, you know, call it growth capital, and to get sizable rounds done. And that's not just having 1 or 2 demos. That's basically being put into a kind of broad commercial product. That bio and CO₂ based processes, we actually see them collaborating quite closely. A lot of bio-based processes actually produce very high concentrations of CO₂, which can be incredibly useful. And also we can explore, you know, the potential for dropping CapEx amounts, and also seeing where AI can take us. So if you put all that together, you know, is it time for an increased pickup of interest in bio and CO₂-based chemistry? So that's the question we ask ourselves. So without further ado, let me turn and introduce our panel. And each one, I'll start with Keith, and we've got a couple of slides on each that we will go through. So we'll start with Keith, who's CEO of Econic, and then to Tato Biggio, who you may know is head of UBQ, Richard Locke, COO of Holofirm, and of course, Rob van der Meeg from Capricorn. So over to you, Keith.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Very much appreciate the introduction and the focus on cost and performance. And we're on the brink of the rewiring of supply chains, and our role in that is to redeem CO2, to turn it from a waste product to a valuable raw material, to really redefine essential products for good. And we're part of an ecosystem which is growing. And the chart on the left comes from the Renewable Carbon Initiative out of Germany. And effectively their crystal ball shows that the manufacturing environment will move from primarily fossil-based as it is today, and this is for chemicals and polymers, to in 2050 that it will be dominated by recycled material, by CO2, and by bio-based material, effectively renewable carbon. And what's clear is we're absolutely at the beginning of that journey, and there is no silver bullet with regard to these different sources of renewable carbon. But our vision is that we're going to insert CO2 as a valuable raw material into the backbone of existing products. And as our technology is catalytic technology, we can get up to 40% of CO2 into surfactants, up to 30% in polyols, essential component for polyurethane manufacture. In the future, we'll be working, or our polymers will be used in conjunction with bio-based and recycled materials. So the areas that we focus as a business are, and we've got a platform, catalytic technology, and the next slide, please, which covers a whole range of different technologies. But what's important now is to get to market and start to build a valuable business. So we're focused on polyols for the polyurethane industry. We're advanced there with licenses which were cast in 2022. Plants are being built and are coming online in the US and in China this year, which is incredibly exciting time for us. And then coming behind that, the surfactants market is at the lowest stage of development, but moving rapidly forward. But we have a range of technology to be exploited across a range of further polymers going forward. The next slide, please. But the lead into this really echoes your comments earlier, Andre, is that sustainability is great. Everybody wants to be sustainable, but customers need to pay for it. And there's no compromise with regard to performance. So we need to put together all of these elements in order to be able to start the business. As volumes increase going forward, then costs will come down and we'll become more economically competitive as we move forward. But we're just at the beginning of that journey now, and it's a very exciting time to be here. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it.
Brilliant, Keith. Keith, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So could I turn over to Tato to introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you, Andre, and thank you, Victor. I have one slide. Try to put everything in one page, and I think that you will understand pretty quick what is UBQ coming with into the market. We realized that organic matter, any organic matter, food residues, cardboard, paper, which are organic as well, they all hold a very similar particle structure. And basically nature has created out of all the materials a very similar matrix that compose the way they are built. The building blocks of organic matter are essentially the same. Doesn't matter if it's a cucumber or a tomato or a potato or a chicken, okay? What UBQ did is the following. We're taking household waste, mixed household waste, We're removing metals and minerals that are expensive and have a lucrative market. So we take them out and we keep all the organic materials like food residues and dirty cardboard, dirty paper, diapers, and all the mixed plastics, and convert all of them into one homogeneous, consistent thermoplastic material, which means we are a plastic alternative made entirely out of waste, as opposed to conventional plastics that are entirely made out of oil. So we're coming with an alternative plastic, which is green, it's circular, it's carbon negative, it's highly recyclable, and it abides by industry standards that we can ship to plastic producers to create products that are greener, sustainable, and carbon negative, or carbon reduced. And that's what we do. We from the conversion of the waste into UBQ material, we have patented a comprehensive process that then this material is sold to the market. So we don't make boxes or furniture or piping or roofing with our material. We just create the material so manufacturers who specialize in different applications can enjoy an alternative material with all these very strong value propositions that we come and that are completely, way ahead of what the market ever saw. So UBQ is a new natural resource made out of materials that are problematic, that are wasteful, that create a lot of harms to the environment because landfills are super pollutants. And we are bringing back a material that doesn't cost the planet, on the contrary, to serve, the growing demand for materials. And as you heard before, plastics and bioplastics are on the grow. And here you have an alternative material that abides by standards, by current standards, that can be used in current machines, using the same processes and cycle times, and we're competitive. And that is something that relates to what Keith was mentioning before. Your material has to perform, your material has to be easy to use, and your material has to be competitive. In our case, we are competitive because we start with a raw material that the cost is negative. They pay us to take the waste. So it's a very interesting model where we get paid for our raw material. And then, of course, the conversion is very sophisticated, but we can reach a price that is still very competitive, so that no one can say, there's an excuse not to implement UBQ. And that is why UBQ today is being used in the car industry. You can see here some examples. In the left is the construction. You have the retail. That black shelf is Pepsi, is a Pepsi shelf where they put Cheetos and Doritos in supermarkets, made of UBQ. In the middle, consumer durables like chairs and boxes. Supply is pallets, bins, boxes. And in automotive, we're shipping material to tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 customers to supply companies like Mercedes-Benz and Ford. The company has installed a very big plant in the Netherlands. That is what you see on the upper side. You can see it's a big building. We're able to process 110,000 tons of waste and convert them entirely into UBQ material to create 80,000 tons. 80,000 tons is a lot. And as I said, the process is very energy efficient because we don't cross the 200 degrees centigrade temperature. So as opposed to these chemical recycling systems where you go to the molecular level with very, very high temperatures and emissions, in the case of UBQ, we stop at the particle level. We break material to the particle level and then blend them into and create this new matrix. Completely certified and validated, and today we're leading in our sector, the market, and still with a lot of challenges to make people, implement a new material. It's always difficult because people love not to change, but here we are.
Brilliant. Excellent, Tato. And, I think it's obvious to many, but you do this using a waste, not actually cutting down a forest, so it's, you get a double kind of tick, right? Anyway, thank you. Let's move on to Holoferm, to Richard Locke. Richard, welcome.
Hi, Andre. Hi, Victor. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this as well. So if I just quickly talk about who Holoferm are. So Holoferm, stands for holistic fermentation. So it's everything to do with fermentation to create specialty chemicals, so to become a biochemical manufacturing company. So in total, we were founded in 2018. To date, if you take all of our funding in, we've sort of raised across various areas. You can see this up to circa 38 million. From that, what we do is we've then picked in a first area, and our first area that we picked in, which is biosurfactants. And the reason we picked in the biosurfactants as the first pillar and the first platform is because what we've found and what you can see is that biosurfactants are extremely important and surfactants are extremely important, and nature and the environment has needed them for hundreds of millions of years. And so what we've now found is we're finding them within nature, and then we're industrializing them processes, which then gives you more and gives you more benefits, and actually makes better products than the products that come out of the ground in terms of fossil fuel based ones. And so yes, we've started with what we call the sophorolipids. So if you go to the next slide, please. What we did is we've actually tried to buck the trend a bit, is utilizing innovative methods. We've built the capex, we've built the plant, and we now have a full commercial plant. So as part of our process and our thought process, talking about what you also said earlier, Andre, with around TRL levels, we also look very heavily about CRL levels, so commercial readiness levels. There is no point in having something that is technically fantastic if you cannot get a commercial reason and commercial value to utilize it. And we see that fermentation is a route and methodology and processing route that can actually turn that and make that happen. So what do we do in a nutshell? We are fantastic engineers, and what we can do is liquid phase separation. So for anyone technical on the call, what we do is we induce liquid phase separations that allows us to do fermentation products from batch to continuous. That drastically lowers the price point and allows us to achieve parity, and in some cases cheaper than petrochemical sources, plus the added benefits that you get for utilizing products that's had 500 million years of natural evolution. For anyone on the call that's not technical, what we do is we milk microbes. That's the other way of thinking around it. So we take an organism, we let it grow, we identify a molecule of choice, we allow it to get to certain conditions, we then bring it out of its reactor, its home, its shed, and then we milk it. The organism goes back in alive and then starts to continue to reproduce more of the molecules of choice that we do. So that's that's our process. And what we are doing is focusing completely on cost performance. If it doesn't give you cost performance, there is no point in doing it.
No, perfect. And I think, as we've been hearing, biosurfactants is clearly one of the ones that's already proving itself in the market. So lots to talk about going forward. So finally, can I introduce Rob from Capricorn? Welcome, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Andre and Victor, for the invite. Appreciate. So we are a venture capital investment fund, happen to be based in Belgium, but investing in Europe and the US. Our experience on the bio side is it's both good and bad. There's some scar tissue, but there are also quite some significant achievements. We've gone through a learning curve in the bioeconomy world, started in 2008 with our investment in Avancium. New material, new process, creating a polymer, actually quite an achievement. Avancium is really the only new polymer created by a non-large corporate company. So I think that's quite a great achievement. And initially it was aimed at replacing PET, but then we found out it's actually better. So the story became, it's not a replacement, it's a better alternative, actually with different applications than just PET. But it's a new molecule, new process. You have to go through a lot of qualifications. Then investment in Econic, which is almost a drop-in. I have to admit, this is how I sold it in our investment committee. So don't quote me on that. But it's Keith already said enough of it. But we think this is a great application of waste CO2, bringing it into day-to-day products, actually with a very low capex modification for the manufacturing. But as Richard said, it's competing both on performance and cost.
Yeah.
So that's great. And then recently we had our first big drop-in, true drop-in. We invested in Trillium, company taking glycerol to acrylonitrile. So an existing molecule, but a brand new process. And we produced a bunch of acrylonitrile, and ScienceCo put the first 9 kilometers of fiber produced with that molecule without changing anything from the original process that they use with the chemically produced acrylonitrile. So this is a true drop-in process. And if I can take also the next slide, we truly believe in the bio oil, but also on the fermentation side. And I take DMC as an excellent example of the power of what industrial biotech and fermentation can bring you. In this company, we combine not just materials, but also shareholders that are active in tires, in materials, in flavors, in nutrients, in health, and in chemicals, all in one company based on one platform. So this platform produces molecules for the food industry, for the tire industry, for the flavor industry, food ingredients. So we think that that's a great example of what biotech can do and where it's going to. So that's my introduction.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Rob. So, and also heads up for a deal coming this way, right?
Yeah.
So, right. So I'd like to jump straight into the panel discussion, and a couple of subjects that I think are emerging, and maybe I could start with you, Keith, on utilization versus storage. We hear a lot about CCU and CCS, and also I think it reflects a little bit, Tato, on what you were talking about, and in both cases, it's actually taking what we consider to be a problem and which actually is an asset, right? And so maybe, Keith, let's start with you on CCU versus CCS.
All right. Thanks, Andre. Yeah, it's a good place to start. We often get confused with being a carbon capture company, and we're a carbon utilization company. And really, it's all about the business model. So, carbon capture is essential as long as we have an energy base which relies on fossil fuels. And effectively, the burning of the fossil fuels emits a vast amount of CO2, some 49 million tons per year and growing. And effectively, that material does need to be captured. But the question is, who pays? And if you look at the cost model, and it is a cost model, and in terms of how you create value from that, then you've got to pay to put the carbon capture unit on the plant. You've then got to pay to transport it and ship it. You've then got to pay to sequester it or store it. Now, turning that whole argument around, where you've got that payment which really is dependent on either the taxpayer or the customer, or effectively the owner, the shareholder, then effectively you got to flip that argument completely and refer to carbon dioxide as being a valuable source of material which it needs to be exploited. So it's an incredibly exciting proposition to take something which is a negative value, and in the same way as Tato referred to being paid to take waste away, CO₂ is available depending on the incentives. Is readily available from the gas producers today. It will start to be available from point sources, and effectively, depending on how you value it, it has a negative value. So if you use that and and in your polymer system, the delta or the spread between the monomer that you're replacing with CO₂ is normally really very, very attractive. Now, the process is key as part of that, is that the process has to be competitive in terms of being cost effective. And effectively, we're a catalyst company. And we're on a mission here with regard to driving volume in the marketplace in order that we can take the cost out of the process going forward. Now, just to expand on this a little bit, because it's not all roses, and otherwise people would have been doing this years ago in terms of CO₂. I mean, you get it out of the air, it's readily available. But without getting too techie, but think about this at an atomic level. The challenge is that every atom in a CO₂ molecule is effectively happy as Larry. They're covalently bonded together. They're in their lowest energy state. They are so stable, so happy together that you've got to put energy into the molecule to break it up and turn it into usable carbon. And that's where our technology comes in. And where we believe that we've got a competitive advantage is if you look at the ways to do that, you can do it through fermentation process, and you can do it through electrophoresis. Then effectively you're going to look at long timelines, or you're going to look at the need for low cost, sustainable clean energy. From our perspective, we do it with catalysis, and we do it with catalysis that works in existing base, same pressures, same temperatures, the ability for customers to be able to retrofit their plants and utilize our catalysis system to break that molecule apart and turn it into carbon that they can use and adds value to their business. So that's the challenge, and that's the challenge that we're overcoming now in terms of rewiring the economies, the manufacturing economies to recognize CO₂ as being a valuable source of carbon rather than purely a waste.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, fascinating. And I think also, Tato, it kind of appears in your line of work as well, because of your technology. You're able to take something, you're actually being paid to take your feedstock.
Yeah, it's quite an advantage, especially in Europe, because the alternative cost of waste in Europe is the highest in the world, by the way. I mean, Japan is even higher, but Japan is a different planet. Yeah, so again, it's the same challenge. It's coming with something that is efficient and safe to use, and of course competitive, and then showing the market that the change is possible, and that they are going to be just transitioning into something better. But it has to be a transition. If you tell them change everything, forget it.
Yeah. So just if I turn thank you, and if I turn to Rob for a second, I mean, because Rob, you see the industry from an investor's perspective. Do you think that to get the cost advantage, doing what you see at Econic and at UBQ gives it that inherent advantage? And do investors really care about that? Or sort of say, actually, if I get plastics from sugarcane or from, other wood waste or stuff, is it, I mean, do they look that through, or is it just purely at the end of the day, do I have a, cheaper product that's as good as the fossil-based one?
Well, I can't speak for all investors, so
no, just
I'll give you our perspective. We look at the total picture, and Capricorn say we invest where where technology matters and where technology makes a difference. But in essence, we look at it from a very simple perspective, like, does it make sense? Is the world better off with or without this company? That's
yeah.
And then where a lot of investors look at propositions like from a perspective of 50 reasons why we would not do it. And we're more like find the one compelling reason why to do it. Yeah. And yeah, cost performance is an important element. And when you start to compete on performance, you got to think about, is it for companies nice to have, or does it make a difference? And again, then does it make sense? Question comes back to you. How important is it? And of course, when I come from the refining industry in my dark past, and there, when there was compliance, license to operate, everything was possible. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, boom, we got to do this, we got to get it. And then innovation came into play, boom, 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 boom. When it's something that's better, then you got to think about, is this going to make a difference for the customers?
Yeah.
And if it for the customers makes a real difference, then you can overcome the cost barrier. But if it's not that way, then you got to start making trade-offs. But then also, you cannot compare a completely new industry or a new technology with very matured businesses, right? The first polyethylene plant wasn't 1 million tons, and it wasn't produced at the price of today. So, but you can find applications. People always think that certain commodities are all sold at the same price in the whole world. Well, that's not the case. Every commodity seller has a tail where the price goes up. And those are the markets where you have to enter. Like with Polyfirm, I worked in Shell, sold alcohols to Procter & Gamble. Yeah, they paid the lowest price. But believe me, a coating supplier in Japan who used the same surfactant paid a totally different price.
Yeah.
So that's and that's for the startup companies and the scale-ups. I think the important part, find these champion markets where you make a difference.
Yeah. No, I think that's words of wisdom there, Rob. Thank you. If I turn a little bit to something that's dear to everyone's heart, is scaling sustainability. How do we scale? And I think, Tato, maybe I start with you, because you guys, I think you're almost out of the hole there. I mean, you guys have actually scaled, but we could see by your thing. And then maybe turn to Richard, because you're right in that phase, right? You've got a proven product, you're going. So maybe, Tato, a little bit kind of on the challenges and how much was kind of luck, how much was foresight, and kind of where were you a couple of years ago, and where you think you're heading, and insight.
It's a huge challenge, and that's the first thing you have to ask, I think, when you start developing a technologies. If you can think about how you are going to be already scaling it if you succeed. So in the case of UBQ, what we did is we invented a reactor. We call it a reactor because it's a process, a machine that reacts into it, the materials, and creates this new thermoplastic. We started from one reactor, so we didn't start with a mini unit. We decided, okay, let's build a reactor as if it was 10 reactors one next to the other eventually, okay? And that decision is very costly. And on the other hand, if you do that, then the scaling is easier, because then you put a few of them one next to the other. So if it works here in the south, then why not in the Netherlands or the US? It's just adding space, nothing else, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way we created the scaling of the business. We can add lines. It's a matter of space, energy, labor. Of course, you have to have the space and the energy, but if you have everything, you can build a huge plant. So that's a decision from the beginning that was expensive, but very faithful.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Richard, thoughts from yourself?
So how we sort of did it is we sort of we basically try to turn things on their head and try and be a bit innovative in sort of the scaling up process to get capital in the ground. So what I mean by that is that, first of all, we built our own pilot plant. and we built it on what I consider on the cheap. So we utilized local supply chain. We bought secondhand bits of equipment to get actually to show that the process can be done using secondhand pieces of equipment, which is also sustainable, but actually it's about making a process that's very robust. And then when we got, once we then, and what we did is we then proved, like I said, at each step, whenever we made anything, we always made sure we could sell it. So even material that came out of our pilot plant, we ensured that there was somebody was willing to pay for it. So actually our first sales out of the pilot plant went to Italy into exactly as Rob was sort of saying, you find the right market, the right things. There's always a tail. And if you find some people to take it on the smaller volumes, but you showed that there was a market there. That then allowed us to go to our investors. And then what we did when we went for our commercialized plant, it's pretty simple. Similar to Tato, is that we went to the commercial scales first.
Yeah.
The only thing that we did different, and this is where I did it very differently, is as soon as we got our capital investment, I went to a second-hand manufacturer or distributor of vessels that had done food grade vessels and had done food grade materials, and I bought them all on a bit of paper. I said, we want that, and that.
Yeah.
I then got our fermenters built by the nuclear industry because they're cheaper than the biotech industry because they put a wedding cake on. So I called it the wedding cake effect.
Yeah.
In doing that, what that actually allowed us to do is to build a full commercial plant for like the actual technology itself was about we spent, and everything in place was about 4 million. And then I spent the rest of the money. We spent about another 4 million on power, backup power, utilities, because we went to effectively a greenfield. It was a big building, but we went to a brownfield site, but it wasn't prepped. So our technology, if you do it that way, is not standard, but it was actually really, really eye-opening, and it's all possible. And I've just seen that someone's just also asked a question. I don't know if I wanted to can I jump onto that and ask about bio-based alternatives from Andrew?
Yes. I was about to say relative to the food industry.
Yeah. Or about
please.
The scarcity. I think it goes back to what we've all said on here. If you look at all of us on the call, there is no silver bullet. And if you look at the market right now, the market needs is all very, very, very varied. So yes, correct. You can't compete against food if you're going to replace every chemical in the world with fermentation, but we don't say that. What you do is you're going to create the specialty ones that are giving added value and added benefit. So actually, I don't think there is a competition because you're now looking at something that is of value in performance, and then that gives you cost benefits going forward. Also, with fermentation, we can use second generation and third generations. The only reasons we don't at the moment is simply because of the supply chains aren't there. And there's also a lot of reports. I think if the UK government's been doing a lot of reports, and they've just done the decarbonisation and the defossilization reports, and there's plenty of biomass in the UK to sustain a 500 billion UK bio-based industry. I think there's enough biomass just in the UK for around 30% of all specialty chemicals, which would be great if you did your fermentation from that.
Well, and it's a brilliant question, which kind of actually was behind the way we built the panel, because I think, Keith and Tato's businesses are built on, actually not having a reliance on any competition with food, right? And maybe just a couple of words, Keith, because that really is about CO₂-based, chemistries. You don't, you don't touch it at all, right?
No, we don't touch it at all. No, there's no competition with food at all. But coming back to the synergy between the different solutions here, most of if you're going to take a bio route and taking it back to your high school biochemistry, is that for the creation of your biopolymer is going to emit CO₂. And that's CO₂, to actually utilize that CO₂ through our process or a carbon utilization process, it potentially adds more value. So you can see the way that the supply chains will rewire in the future. But it's key that it's going to be a combination of different solutions here. But starting off with businesses which stand on their own two legs, you can then start to see these things coming together, holistically. But no, we don't have any competition with food, and we're quite fortunate that raw materials at the moment, there should be credit for the treatment of waste, and I guess it's the regulatory environment around how you value carbon is a key macro with regard to carbon utilization.
Right, right. Could I maybe turn to a slightly different subject now, and it's going to come back to you, Keith, and because we see it with a lot of other British companies, is the ability to build partnerships, and that's how you scale your technology in a sense of, well, I'm not, my business model isn't to build plants all around the world, but maybe build friendships, build license partners, and scale that way. Maybe because we've seen you've been particularly active in the last 3 or 4 years in that regard.
No, we have. I mean, we have been active, but I would say, I mean, 3 categories really in terms of building partnerships. I mean, I'd start off with investors, and I'm not just saying this because Rob's on the call, but you have to have investors that understand what you do.
Yeah.
Because the path going forward is not going to be a smooth road, and the hockey stick graphs, they're normally a little bit more lumpy. So from that perspective, you need people that can understand the challenges that you're going through and understand the business going forward. And so supportive investors are incredibly important. And you mentioned at the beginning about CVC coming in. And you'll see CVC coming in with Petronas and GC invested in Econic, and we really welcome that industrial base because it helps. But also investors that understand the financial community in terms of when you get to require debt. And can help you at different parts of your journey. So if there's that alignment between the investment thesis and the trajectory of the company, that's just incredibly valuable. And it's even time is our kryptonite. So the ability to be able to have those conversations and not go through all of the explanation that sometimes you have to go through for folks that don't understand you so well, that's really valuable. Second one I'd talk about is customers, and we just love customers, and customers are our future and effectively the lifeblood of the company going forward. And getting the first customers are critical. I mean, these are the brave souls, as I call them, pioneer investors. They buy into the value proposition, but normally, and certainly in stressed industries or in growing industries, there's opportunity. And customers have to do things differently. They have to look at their markets differently and their technology differently in order to be able to move it forward. Now, if you can sell that and get those first folks on board, then you have to work very, very closely with them in order to be able to build that path and the first plants. So the learning that's come from the building of the first plants to take something which is a brilliant chemistry innovation and take it through engineering processes where it's robust enough to be able to deliver a valuable product, then that's another journey that you go through. Now, customers number 3, 4, and 5 are incredibly important because they create the momentum, and then you get into FOMO, and that's part of our business thesis going forward. Third one I'd talk about is ecosystem. An ecosystem is we exist in a very, very diverse, fragmented industry, but it's the complexity that adds the value. So to be able to plug gaps in your own organization with regard to engineering expertise, we've done deals with engineering companies in order to be able to get the expertise in to be able to build pilot plants or get through design. There's if you take it to the other end of the value chain, Rob posted us as being not a drop in, a drop alike, which I like that phrase. I've not seen it before. But we work with additive producers. We work with end users. We work with people that understand the end product which our materials are going into, or rather our customers' materials are going into, to be able to get test formulations done in order to be able to get approvals in the market and create that pull. And then if you look at regulators, and if you look at being a highly regulated industry, then effectively the providers of LCAs and the providers of regulatory approvals and so on and so forth, you have to have a network which allows you to get to the right people quickly and be able to get the components in to be able to build the business. So, investors, customers, and an ecosystem, they're all essential. But the investors, certainly at the early stage of the business, the customers for where the business is ultimately going to be going. And those are the folks that we need to make sure that we listen to intently and develop our value proposition to be absolutely compelling to help them grow their business.
Yeah, and wise words, Keith. And I want to turn to investors in a minute, but just before we do that, coming back to you, Tato, and maybe to Richard, comments I've heard in the past about, you can't do this without partnerships. Partnerships are absolutely critical. So maybe, Tato, just a couple of words on kind of your view and your experience in that, and maybe over to Richard.
Okay, I will get first. The first thing that I want to note is that for me, our suppliers are our partners as well. So, of course, you're not going to be building a plant, at the project level all the way with them. But if they are part of an ecosystem that you create, where you are working with them consistently, they become in a way an incredible asset. So I have to tell you that in the Netherlands, for example, the level of service and commitment of our suppliers was beyond a normal thing, because they want to create this new market, this new trend, just like all the other technologies we're hearing, because the upside of being different and having a new market, attracts everyone. So if you create that bond and you know how to give them the right appetite, it's easier. It's much easier. The challenge is easier. Then in regards to the plant, yes, definitely we have to work with partners. I will give you one case in the US. Our partner will be the Way supplier, which is a very prominent company traded in NASDAQ Black. So they feel that they want to be involved in a new ecosystem. Right. In the supply chain here, not in the machinery, but in the feedstock, and in the Emirates, where we are very, very advanced, there will be an announcement in 1 month, hopefully. It is actually the government that is pushing for new technologies that is pushing. So partnerships are extremely helpful, because as you have heard many times, these are capital-intensive businesses, and that is heavy. So if you have strong partners coming with you, it's okay to split the sometimes the revenue or the profits, but growing the company is where the idea. No, that's the idea. So that's the way we approach it.
Absolutely. And Richard, we've heard from you earlier about how you were able to buy expensive kit on the cheap, but in terms of just more broadly, partnerships, any thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, 100. So yeah, partnerships, you fail without partnerships. You need partnerships across the board. We separate them, or the way I see them, and separate the partnerships you've got, because we don't believe in competitors. And let me expand on that as I go into how we split what partnerships are focused into. We go to the customer focused partnerships, right? And what I mean by that is that customers are king, but so we have to meet their requirements. For that, you actually always want a dual source. So actually we want to find partners so that we don't see anybody else making biosurfactants as competitors. Actually, we need to work together to grow the cake. So actually forming partnerships with our perceived competitors or
Mm-hmm.
partnerships with our other manufacturers so that we can give the right solution to the end customers. Because if we don't provide the right solutions to them, you don't have a business. And from there, and then when we're going into the building side as well, yeah, we form our partnerships a little bit different in terms of our approach, in that we believe in the partnerships of the supply chains and forming them ecosystems. But because we're finding that we're a disruptor technology to really established businesses, it's actually easier for us, and then we're still in that scale up phase, is that we want to hold on to that technology. So most of our technology is trade secrets. We've got patents and trade secrets. And but then also if you can build it yourself when you're doing it, like there were times when we had to do it, like I was doing it 2 a.m. in the morning with my laptop monitoring the fermentations. Sometimes if you're working in other larger companies or in sort of different rules apply, because we can be agile. But you form these, but as we expand, definitely these link into these partnerships that are then customer focused, then become more back through the business. Does that make sense?
Complete sense. Yeah. Brilliant. So can I turn to you, Rob? The big subject here of investors and capital. And, from the outside, our impression has been that, there's a good number of investors like yourselves that are specialist investors, and they can pick companies up at an early stage. But are there enough investors at the kind of C and D and E round when, the rounds aren't, 10, 15, 20 million, they're 30, 40, 50, 60, or 100? And I'm just wondering, because there are companies that are maturing, as we've kind of highlighted in our presentation, but that are getting to that size of requirements. And, is the investment community there? And I just wondered, how do you, and that's our view, might be completely wrong, but just what are your thoughts about the investment community, and is it able to kind of start to invest those sums to kind of get people through that TRL 5, 6, 7 to the 8 level?
I think it's both yes and no. So at the moment, there is also a shortage in the market for investors like us.
Yeah.
Because fundraising for new funds at the moment is very difficult for people like us, because we didn't have the exits in our previous funds yet, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of money in the market for CD rounds, but it tends to go to topics that are more in fashion.
Yeah.
And what I mean is we see lots of big ass funding for SAF, for air capture and all those
trophy
things,
stuff. Yeah.
Where you can wonder, like, does it make sense, right? And what happens there is that these are often political choices. Okay.
Yeah.
And one thing I've learned in about 35 years of technology innovations, that politicians and governments typically make very bad technology choices. Okay, because they try to control and steer the future. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, but what you see is there's a lot of governmental funds that have quite some money for scale up, but they get pushed by their shareholder or shareholders to invest in that hypey, fashionable, sexy stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas as practical stuff, like what Holly Firm's doing, what Tato is doing, what Keith is doing, it doesn't tip the sexy scale, right? But it's very practical day-to-day stuff. And with these companies, it's like the entry barriers into business is pretty high. But once you're in, all my life in the chemicals business, it's a cash machine, right?
Yeah.
But you got to get in there, and so there is enough money? Are there enough investors on the C&D rounds that get it? No. Could they get it? Yes, but they have to think about risk differently. I always argue, and I need to find some English linguists who can help me with this. Risk and uncertainty are two different categories.
Yeah.
In our company Trillium, we make bioacrylonitrile. People ask me, is there a market for bioacrylonitrile? Well, there's a market for 7 million tons of acrylonitrile. So I think there's a market for bioacrylonitrile, right? But these C and D type investors, they like to invest, say in the first plant. Well, not in the first, they want the second. $100 million.
Yeah.
And they want that $100 million to be financed in one set of documents. Whereas if you work in a large corporate like in Dow or Shell, they never make a final investment decision of 100 million in one go.
Yeah.
It goes through risk phases. And if these financiers would go with you on these risk phases, you know, then the initial capital risk is there, because after your detailed engineering, you can think like, well, costs are higher than expected. Do we go or do we don't go? But that's only a couple of $1 million. But with that money, you de-risk 90 million down the road.
Yeah.
You know, so if they learn that they also should co-invest in that first 5 to 10, you know, but not try to get it all in one go, then I think we can, as a community, we can get better on that. But they were spoiled by renewable energy, because there, you've been to windmill, you've been to solar park, you get an offtake for all the electricity you make. You know, and in the chemicals industry, I've been trying to explain to people that long-term offtake for products does not exist. But an example from my own practice, Shell Chemicals and Unilever in Europe do business for 30 years already on a quarterly basis without a contract. So,
exactly.
You know, but it's that fear and what they call risk, you know, and which is an uncertainty. Will you sell? It's like,
Well, do you, but Rob, do you think that a fundamental understanding of the fact that at the end of the day, this chemistry can work, it's how do you make it commercial, can help investors? Because I think if you say, if I put in 5 or 10 right now, but I know down the road to make it successful, another 90's got to be there. I don't know if that 90's going to be there because I'm just an IC who doesn't really understand this space that well. So I'm not going to bank on someone else coming in and sort of bailing me out, or if they do, I'll get wiped out, right? You know,
so if your future 90 million investor group, you know, would participate in that early part, you know, but if I go to an investor for 100 million and I ask him, can you participate for 5 in the first? They're like, 5 is too small for us. You know, there's also a bit of arrogance in this financing world. I don't pick up the phone for $5 million. You know. But it's the understanding of how you go through this project, and there it comes down to the relationships and the partnerships and the understanding. That okay, then also as a company, you'll have to commit. Like, hey, if we go through this finance, you'll be the financer of choice, right? You got a rover right or something like that. But it's building this common understanding, and I think it's improving. You know, there's help from governmental funds, there's help from the European Committee funds. It starts to improve.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think just by looking at the screen here with a lot of nodding heads, you know, that people have been through what you're just describing. I think we're coming up to where we got another 10 minutes left, and I'd like to invite each of you to sort of just give some parting comments, you know, because we are unfortunately running short of time. Just before I do that, we've had a very interesting comment or question based off of your points, Rob. It's really about, are governments in power long enough to actually make some change, or is it got to change every 4 or 5 years? You know, coincidentally, might be referring to my country, the U.S. But you know, I've seen Hinkley Point C has had at least 20 different ministers over it. But it does beg a question of, can governments depoliticize innovation and say, you know, whether it's renewable energy or biochemistry? So, but it's a thought for probably a whole other webinar. But if I could just go around the table and maybe start with you, Richard, just a couple of minutes on kind of closing thoughts from you and Hollifer, you know, of what you're looking to do over the next year, and then I'll go around the table.
Yeah, so I think to quick on the I quickly jump in on the regulations one, the how the governments can help, because I'm sitting on a couple of panels at the moment for the UK government and the
Mm,
defossilization.
mm.
The challenge where I see there is that they put all their eggs in one basket, and then they don't want to pivot quickly. That's the real challenge. Actually, the how you succeed as a business and as a startup and scale up is if you fail quickly and pivot away. And I think they need to take that on board, and then then you can move your needle past your 4 to 5 years. For Holly Firm, what we're looking at is that continued growth into the new markets and new verticals. I would love for but everyone's on the call is probably going to nod at this. I'd love for customers to speed up their uptake times, because the world in scale up time, 1 month for me can turn into 6 months for a going concern
Life and
business.
death. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But we always say pick your battles. So
Yeah.
we adapt, and then like you go for the smaller moving ones to get the markets in. And so yeah, so I think for us it's about support the bio-based. We know we're one part of the pie, but then keep an eye on us as we look to expand and start coming to the market. And with our new CEO, Charlie Dimler on board, it's some very exciting times coming ahead, and I'm very excited about how we're going to develop over the next 12, 24, 36 months.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Maybe I turn to Tato. Just closing thoughts from yourself.
Yes, happy. I think that just a closing thing, the coming back a little to what Rob was mentioning on the funding, in each stage the company, there's different scales of investors that you will require. Sometimes it's difficult to choose them because you need the money.
Yeah.
But still, again, just like you choose a supplier, just like you choose an employee, if you can really work on choosing the right partner at the investor level, that you will sequence a great cap table eventually, right? You could.
Yeah.
And you never control anything because that guy can change, that partner can change, but still, I will tell you that our cap table is small, and you have venture VCs, and you have strategics, and you have equity funds like TPG, and they all live happily together because there is an understanding that each one plays a role.
Yeah.
Because they came at the right time, and it's not I was here before. No. Everybody respects the other. It's a difficult thing to do, by the way. But again, if you want to hear a thought, that's a thought. Try to, and on the other hand, another thing that was just mentioned about the frameworks and regulations, etc. Don't count on them. Don't count on them, because see what's happening in the US now.
Yeah.
So we just got in December so to tell you, the 48 cap C tax credit approved.
Yeah.
Part of the IRA program. It's we don't have it anymore. So you never count on those things. By the way, so if it comes, it comes. But you have to stand on yourself. No subsidies, no long-term orders. Like Rob was saying, there's no long-term here. It's a quarterly program. It's not a yearly program. So I enjoy this very much, by the way, and seeing that my peers have exactly the same challenges.
Anyway, no,
So
excellent,
thank you guys,
Tato.
for putting this together, and
Tato,
enjoying this.
Absolutely brilliant. So let me turn to Keith for some thoughts.
Well, the thoughts of building off of the question with regard to government's long-term view. I mean, and just to echo Tato's comments, I mean, we just can't rely on governments. But there's some really good global corporations which have been around for hundreds of years, and they're looking forward, and they are responding to consumer demand, and the consumer demand is pushing the need to rewire supply chains to be much more sustainable and much more renewable. And then it's the next generation which are going to make the decision on this. What's interesting, I mean, relating it back to government, I mean, China see this. China have a long-term view, and it's really, really clearly set out in
Yeah.
industrial strategy, and effectively the supply chain which is being built is aligned around that. You know, not to be too dark about it, you know, you then look at localization of supply chains, and all of that entails, you know, the future is potentially bright if some of these technologies are adopted and used on a local basis, whether it be the recycling of waste or the fermentation of bioproducts or the utilization of CO2. You can do all of that on a local basis. But you have to be cost competitive, and effectively you have to have the right environment in terms of building manufacturing supply chains around sound industrial understanding and policy. So remain very optimistic about things, and that this is happening. I think we're on the beginning of a journey, but it'll be interesting to see how it lands from a geographic perspective.
Yeah, no, great thoughts. While we've been discussing this, I just had a question. I think you may have seen it on the chat. We won't have time to cover it, but I think it's worth just repeating it. It's from Nick from GC Ventures, which says, we believe defossilization is a global agenda. What investors and corporates from Asia could do more to support you guys? What are the key drivers for your success in emerging Asian markets? Maybe Keith could share a bit of his experience, but want to hear from the others too. So listen, I think you guys have that, but do get back to Nick, because I think, look, Asia is, I mean, they are more organized than we think, right? And certainly more consistent. And I think it's a big part of the market going forward. So yeah, good. Thank you, Nick. So Rob, I sign off with you. So parting thoughts.
Okay, well, to come back to Netabat's point on the cooperation with Asia, I think we should not be restricted by our boundaries. I mean, the chemicals and this kind of business, it's all global. I think what's great is what's bad in Europe is that the corporates are very innovation averse. Okay, yes, they all have their departments doing little things, but if you look at the top, there's no one on the C-level that got there through innovation. Yeah.
Admin maybe.
All right. So I do believe in the partnerships of startups, scale-ups, and corporates, but you've got to force them to take skin in the game. You know, we have a recent example in DMC. They just announced, I think 2 days ago, a cooperation with Toyobo, American company, Japanese engineered materials company. Great. Look at what Keith is doing. You know, and also Holly Firm, Ben Dolman recently went on an Asia trip. Keith, I think he flies once a month out to Asia. So
Yeah,
you know, this is where you can create speed, and that's also driven by a need and a passion. If I look, to our expectations in the next 12-24 months, it's all about deployment on our portfolio. I hope Keith delivers, then my life is a bit easier too.
no pressure.
It's about deploy.
It's about deployment and stay practical. Keep your eyes on the ball, but also keep thinking, does it make sense what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
That's still where I strongly believe in the practical stuff.
Yeah, because there's always political events happening around us that will buffet, you know, one way or the other, but keep the course. Anyway, guys, this has been amazing. Really, thank you all for this. You're generous with your time and your thoughts, and I believe we've had a tremendous people dialing in. I think a lot of great thoughts, and I think it'll bode well for the future. So thank you, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Cheerio.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, the audience.
Bye.
Thank you.